I hear it. I do. Good evening. How's everybody this evening? Adequate, okay. Tolerably well. It's good to see you. We're going to do without PowerPoint tonight, or try to anyhow. That may put some of you that haven't been in the class at a little bit of a disadvantage. We are studying stewardship. Let's define what stewardship is. Mike, what's stewardship?
It's a person who has, whether it be wealth, whether it be property, whatever the case may be, entrusted to them by either a friend, relative, or whoever, and they have the responsibility of managing it and maintaining it.
Right. A steward is someone, like Mike said, who has something been entrusted to him. It may even be a job. In fact, anytime our jobs, well, I no longer have a job, but people who are employed have a stewardship because they have been entrusted with doing work for a person. It may be, well, it depends on what it is, but you're entrusted with something. And does it have to be something valuable to cause you to be a steward? No. It's just something that doesn't belong to you that you have got to take care of. We are stewards of who? Of God. God has blessed us with tremendous blessings. And we have got to deal with those things. Let's see, if I've got some of the handouts from last week. If you need one, we're going to do some looking at it. I don't have a whole bunch of them. Anybody want to get one? Okay, scatter them out with y'all over there. As Mike said, hopefully they're adequate. We have learned, or we've been talking about, that there are 5 things that we know we're a steward of. I'm a steward of God because of 5 things. One is everything belongs to who? God. If you go back in Scripture and you look through Scripture, God created everything. God has said that He has everything. All the cattle, all the people belong to God. Everything belongs to God. So if God has everything, how much do I have? I don't own any of it. None of it is mine. But guess what? I've got it. And it belongs to God. God has given me instructions of how I am to use those blessings. He will judge me. And I will be held accountable for what He's done. I didn't get all 5 of them just right, but that's the gist of it. Last week, we started in the third group, or the third week, with stewardship of wealth. And the gentleman that wrote this, that we've talked about, termed this one letting go. We all have wealth. What is wealth? How would you define wealth?
Something of value.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Something of value. Exactly. What does it include? One of the things, if you went to the internet and you said, I want to look up stewardship, you would find that a lot of times it's going to refer you to money. How do I handle my money? And that's a legitimate thing to be concerned about. Because my money is part of my wealth. It is not all of my wealth. My wealth is everything that I have that God has blessed me with. What do we bring into this world? The Bible says what? We brought nothing into this world, and what? And we're not taking anything that's physical out. It says nothing, but we will take our deeds with us. Our soul will go with us. Even our bodies don't belong to us. My kids, well, they're They belong to their wives now, but even them are gifts from God. We have. Good luck, Lauren. I was thinking I watched the other two as well. They've also got their hands full too. Everything I have, God has given me. And I've got to deal with it. The thing that we started talking about last week was mammon. And God says you can't serve two masters. You will either love one and hate the other, or cling to one and desert the other. You can't serve God and mammon. And mammon just means wealth. It means riches. And when you look at what we in this country have, in comparison to a lot of other countries, we are rich beyond what they can even understand. Even some of the poor people here are rich. It's not mine. It's not mine. And we looked at what God had told, or what has happened with God, people, and wealth in the past. We started with tithing. We're going to just say it right now. We are not under a tithing order. Christians are not ordered to tithe. What does tithing mean? 10%. A tithe is just a tenth, 10%. And when God says, I want you to give a tithe of your land, your fruits, your animals, he says, I want you to give 10%. Whenever Abraham came back from the slaughter of the kings in Genesis, Melchizedek met him. And Abraham blessed him and gave him 10% of what he had gained. 1/10. Jacob, when he was heading away from Esau and heading to get a wife, ended up with 2 of them and 12 sons. He promised the Lord that if you will be with me and let me have a prosperous journey, you will be my God and I will give you 10%. Now, when the tithing was done back then, those were one-time deals. There was no command for them to give a tithe. And you think about what Jacob gained when Jacob left and went to Laban and lived with Rachel's father. He didn't have anything when he left. When he came back, he was a very, very wealthy man. He promised the Lord, I will give you 1/10 of everything. That was, and we talked a little bit, or at least I did, that I don't know how he did that. Did he sacrifice 1/10 of everything, all the animals? How did he do that? I don't know. Doesn't matter. If he kept the promise that God gave him, and one thing God says, if you make a promise, you're to keep it. He gave him 1/10 of it. And we think, what do you think of 10%? And we're going to talk about giving tonight. We're going to go through the tithing a little bit, and then we're going to talk about what we look at as Christians in the New Testament through the scriptures there as to what we should be doing. Natalie. I got some competition tonight. That's okay, though. Hey, girl. Keep her quiet, though. Good luck on that one, huh? We're going to look at what the scriptures say that as Christians, what we are to do, because we have some commands given to us. They're not suggestions. They are commands. But when the tithing orders were given, we look back that there was more than one tithe. And as I was looking at it today, there were if you go out and look, there are 3 tithes. There are 3 separate times that God says you are to tithe. One is the general tithing that's given to the Levites. The Levites did not have an inheritance. God was their inheritance. So the people, through the tithing, were supported by God through the Israelites' tithing. That was an annual deal. And they were, but in addition to that, what happened? How did the Israelites, okay, that did not cover animals. That was fruit of the land and things, and some sheep too, I'm sure. But when it got to them, then the Levites had to give a tenth to the priestly tribe of theirs. And that wasn't the animals and things. That was stored up in their houses there. They were supported also by the sacrifices, because whenever you made a sacrifice for different things to God in the Old Testament, under the Levitical priesthood, you had to give part of it, and the priest took part of it. They had to eat it. It was blessed. It was holy in some cases. So they've got money, they got things to eat through that. The second tithe was the tithe of feast, and it's in Deuteronomy 14. It says, and this is the tithe that said, you bring your tithe to Jerusalem, and you will eat it there. And if it's too far for you to go to carry it, then you can convert it to cash. And he says you can convert it to, after you get back here, to anything you want, whatever your heart, your soul desires. Israel was being told at that point, you enjoy what you've done. You've earned it. You partake of it. But that was the tithe they had to give. And then there was the tithe for the poor in Deuteronomy 14 as well. Every third year, the Levites and the strangers, there was a tithe that was brought, and it was for the Levites, the strangers, the fatherless, and the widows. So what you have happening then is you have two 10% tithes, so that's 20% a year, plus a tenth every third year. So a third of a tenth. So there's 23%. I'm sorry. 23% that they were giving that way. And then when they came to Samuel and said, Samuel, we want a king. What did he tell them it was going to cost them? Another 10%. He's going to take 10% of your gardens. He's going to take 10% of your wine. He's going to take 10% of your cattle, your stuff. You're going to fund this with 10%. 30% is what it cost them. And we may think that's kind of high. And it may be. Did you ever go back and read what Joseph did whenever he gave Pharaoh the answer to the dreams about the cattle and the wheat or the corn? Whenever they had the 7 fat years and there were going to be 7 lean years that they weren't going to have anything. During those 7 lean years, they had to go to Joseph. The first year, he sold them what they needed to have. He took all, and the scripture says he gathered up all of their money. This is the King James reading in Genesis 47, verse 14. Second year, he fed them with bread for all of their cattle. He gave them bread, said, you're going to give me all of your cattle. He took it. They agreed. I mean, they had to eat. The next year, he brought all the land. They had to give their land to him for Pharaoh. He gave them seed in return. So they've given up their money. They gave up their cattle. They gave up their land. They now become servants of Pharaoh. And then he says, from that point on, he said, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. He gives them seed. He said, here is seed for you, and you shall sow the land, and it shall come to pass in the increase that you shall give the 5th part to Pharaoh. 4 parts shall be your own, for seed for the field, and for your food, and for them of your household, and the food for your little ones. 20% is what, and then it says that Joseph made a law over the land of Egypt unto this day that Pharaoh should have the 5th part except for the land for the priests. The priests were free from that. 20% tithe. well, not a tithe, the 20% tax. So what do we have today? Whenever we look at what we are commanded to do in funding the work of the congregation to give back to, I'm going to use the words, give back to God. Can I give back to God something that's already His? Really, no. But what I can do is take what I'm supposed to do and do with it what He's told me to do. Turn to 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, and verse 5. It's a statement there, and I'm just going to try to set a foundation. And then we're going to, and I'd like for this to be a discussion tonight as much as we can about the giving. 1 Peter 2 and verse 5, he says, "You also, as lively stones, are built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God by Jesus Christ." We are priests. We are serving God. We have to make the sacrifices for ourselves. And what's that sacrifice? What's part of that sacrifice going to be? Giving our wealth to what God has told us it is to be. Go back to Proverbs. Well, we haven't been to Proverbs, but go to Proverbs 3. Verses 9 and 10, he says, "Give instruction to the wise." Oh, that's not the right one. Proverbs 3, is that what I said? I didn't turn there. Proverbs 3, verses 9 and 10. "Honor the Lord with your substance and with the first fruits of your increase. So shall your barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine." God told them, if you will do what I tell you to, I will bless you beyond measure. You won't have issues. But of course they didn't. But this is one of the things, and this is a proverb. This wasn't a command to them, but a proverb says, if you will do these things, I will take care of you. Honor the Lord with your substance, and your barns will be full. You will have what you need. There's a principle there. And I think that principle really pertains also to us. Now let's get to the meat of the thing. Okay, 1 Corinthians 16. Paul here doing the writing says, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come." This is, I guess, the one that starts everything off for us. At least it seems like in my mind that it does. What is Paul doing? He's getting a gift together, and he's given the same command to other churches to help some needy saints. Let's look at some of the words that are used here. It says, "As I have given order to the churches." That word means to arrange, to appoint, to ordain, to prescribe the order, to give detailed instructions of what must be done. This is a command, folks. This is a command from God that we are to take and to give back to Him for His work. Let's continue on, though. What does verse 2 say? "And upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come." I'm to lay by in store. What does that mean? I'm sorry? Set aside. How? Okay, now think about it. But it says, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by and store. Back then, and we talked last week about this, how were people paid back then? Were they paid on a weekly, bi-weekly, quarterly? I know when I worked for Entergy, I was paid every 2 weeks. Some are shaking their head no. They were paid daily. The 11th hour man, that tells us that because the day was over and they all got paid the same. What is Paul saying here then? If you're paid daily, what are you supposed to do to meet this command?
You take what you made in one day, and do you give 10% every day or just 10%?
Good question. What does he say here? He says, upon the first day of the week. And if you go look at those words in the Greek, not every translation will say this, but some of them will say every first day.
That's what mine says.
Yeah, the New American Standard, I think, says every first day. Upon the first day of, and if you go back and you look at the Greek will tell you that. It means it's the day after Sabbath is what those words really mean. Every first day after Sabbath, you put aside something. What they were intended to do, based on as I could read it, was to put their money aside so that they would have it on Sunday to do what they had to do with it. And then this was then to be given to the congregation to make a common treasury. Two of the Greek scholars, Vincent and Robertson, says it's to put it by at home. In other words, they were to take and do this at home, set it aside so they would have it when they needed it. Do we do that? No. Well, I mean, you can. Can't do it daily as well. But we have something they didn't have. We have a banking system. We have money and accounts that we have access to. So we write a check when we need to. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But he said, you prepare. You lay by and store. And Robertson also said it's to have a habit, to make a habit of doing this. This is not a one-time deal. Melchizedek and Abraham, that was one time. Jacob was one time. Can you imagine being under the Jewish system and having to track it for a year? Because you're going to have to give at a certain time for different things. How much did you have this year? And Jesus dealt with some of them about that at times too. But he says here, on the first day of the week, let everyone you lay by him and store as how? As you have prospered, and some of them will say, as God has prospered. The word for God is not in the original that was added by the King James translators. But what does that mean? As you have prospered or as have been prospered. What does the word prosper mean? Anybody want to take a stab?
Well, that's like you getting your paycheck, you prosper.
That is part of prospering. The word prosper literally means to help someone along, to be granted a prosperous and expeditious journey, to lead by a direct and easy way, according to Thayer, to have things turn out well, to prosper, from the big lexicon on Greek words from Bauer, Danker, and Gingrich. To have a good journey. That's what it literally means. To be helped along on your way. Now, the question that comes to my mind is, how am I helped on my journey? What is my journey? My life. I think you're right. It's my life. How do I quantify? Is my paycheck the only thing that helps me get through my life? Yes or no? No. No. Good answer. I think so. I think that's right. We are helped in a multiplicity of ways. Now, the question that I have is, if we're to give as we have been prospered, as we have been helped, how do we quantify that? Kelton. And I think that's a good explanation. We can't always tell. I'm going to use Todd as an example. You just happen to be sitting in the wrong spot all the time. I don't know. If Todd helps me out, and he would never do this, but let's just suppose he did, and it was something good that I really needed help with, how do I value that? Is it valued strictly with money? No, not really. But in addition to what I'm making, has it helped me out for other things that have come about in my life that God has helped me through? Yeah, I think so. Now, the question that as I was going through this that kept coming to my mind is, okay, how do we do this? We have to come up with a number that we have to give the Lord. The Jews were commanded, you're going to give 10% of this and then 10% of that and so forth. We'll come back maybe to that. But I think it's something that, because we're going to deal with money. If we didn't have money as a system of exchange, we'd have to have some other way to do it, but they had that. 2 Corinthians 9. Verses 6 through 15. We won't go down through 15. We're really going to stop a little before that. He says in verse 6, but this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly, and he that soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. Now, what strikes me is also what's said in the next verse, and God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye always having all sufficiency in all things may abound to every good work. What does that last verse say? God's going to help me, give me the grace, give me the things I do to do the work He wants me to do. Is that right? I mean, it sounds to me, am I wrong? But look where it's coming on. It's right on the bottom of giving and sowing. Sowing. When a person sowed, remember this parable of the sower? How does a sower sow in those days? The scattering seed. Yeah. Could you determine exactly where it was going to go? No. That's why it fell on good soil, bad soil, thorny, and so forth. But I don't think it was put after these verses of sowing and giving just indiscriminately. I think it's a part of the fact that we have to trust God. But look what he says. If we sow sparingly or if we scatter seed out sparingly, if I just throw a little bit of seed out, can I expect a big harvest? But if I throw a lot out, my chances are better. Every man according as he purposeth in his heart. He carries the idea of choose it beforehand. I can't do this at the last minute, go and say, oh, that's right, I got to give. Pull out whatever's in my pocket and drop it. That's not how it works. In his heart, our heart is our mind. Then he says, not grudgingly, not out of sadness or out of sorrow. It's not out of necessity, not of constraint or out of distress. Are we required to do this? Is it necessary that I do this? Yeah. Well, then it is under necessity, but it's not. I don't have to feel that way. Why do I serve God? Do I serve God because I have to? Yeah. But I also serve Him because I love Him and what He's done for me. And then he says, for God loves a cheerful giver. You know what that word cheerful, where it comes from? Hilarious is the word. Hilarious. Cheerful. Does that mean, oh, I'm just so glad you ought to feel that way. But look at what it says, not grudgingly nor out of necessity. Don't act like you have to do this, even though you do. Be cheerful about it. Look what God's done for me. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son.
Also, I know about the money. Can we be a cheerful giver as we come to church and edify and encourage and do the work of the Lord that we can, and then we can go outside and do the same thing?
Yeah. We should be cheerful. And we are giving at that point. We're giving of what we have. But let's talk about our actual giving. We've got about 10 minutes or so. How are we giving? How are you? How am I giving? How are you giving? And the question that I'm asking is, would our giving today to the Lord be what a faithful Jew would give? How many of you know what percent you give to the Lord? Do you actually, if you do it by percent? You don't have to raise your hands. Do you give 10%? Do you give more? Do you give less? Remember, in Hebrews, he talked about whenever the people were trying to leave Christianity and go back into the law. I know we got 5 minutes now. He said, why are you going back? You have a better priest, which you have better promises. He lists in there a better high priest, better hope, better testament, better covenants, better promises, better sacrifices. Is our giving better? Shouldn't we give better sacrifices? In Romans 12, he tells us to present our bodies a living sacrifice. What we're doing is all in the spiritual realm. He says in Romans 12:1, I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable or spiritual service. So I've got something for you to think about. When the Jews gave their 10%, how did they calculate that 10%? Was it after taxes? It's gross. And it may have been gross too. They were doing it, they had to go back to what they had. In fact, they couldn't even change out. If they were, and the scriptures talk about this, you give whatever's there, and you couldn't exchange. If there was a good one coming up, a good sheep was going to be the 10th one, you said, no, I don't want to give him that one. I'm going to take this one over here. It's a little bit, he's got a broken leg. You had to end up giving both of them then. But you know what? You couldn't take a bad one out and put a good one in either. It said good or bad, you take it. Do you look at your giving from time to time? How many of you are making the same you was making last year, 2 years ago? Probably none of us. On Social Security, we got a little bit of a raise this year, so I know mine's a little higher. Do you look at what you're giving and say, my circumstances have changed. I now need to give a different amount. I know that some of you in here have given more. I collect for those of you who don't know, I collect the collections and put them in the bank, so I know what people write checks for. And some of you have. I'm going to tell you something, folks. We have some good givers here. I don't remember the numbers, but after Hurricane Harvey hit Southeast Texas back in 2017, the elders decided that a week or so after that they would allow for a special contribution to be presented to, taken for that purpose. That day, we took a contribution, and part of it was earmarked. People either gave a separate check or they put cash money into envelopes that had their names on it. And I separated all that out. Our normal contribution for that day was a little over $6,000. Us as a congregation, donated almost $10,000 additional. And that's great. And we sent money to congregations to help them. We can't do that without people giving. So do you revisit yours? If everybody gave as you do, could this congregation do its work? Do you give a set percent or a set amount? And do you look at how God has prospered you? I don't know your circumstances. I only know mine. I realize, and I thank the Lord, He has blessed me tremendously. No, I'm not rich by the world standards, but I'm rich by mine. I've got a great wife, good income, 3 lousy boys, 3 good daughters-in-law. No, we're blessed. It's what God has blessed me with. They're not mine. They were given to me. So what I ask you to do is to look at your giving. Re-examine it. Our contribution runs somewhere around, last week it was $5,900. $6,000 we've been doing it. Mike and I remember doing it 20 years ago. We're doing good to get $400 or $500 sometimes. But we had a lot smaller congregation. Think about it. Any comments or questions? Okay, I'm on a separate note totally. This has nothing to do with class, but just because I have you here. The church's website is back up. It is available. It looks totally different. I suggest you go look at it. Frank has been working hard. I have been working hard on some parts of it. Dusty, we all have been. But we've got a new website, same name. And there's going to be, it's not totally, y'all can all come in, that's fine. There's going to be some things that are going to change different. We'll be looking at differently. So, and we'll get more information out to you as we can. But sermons are out there. You can go listen to sermons. You can go listen to any of them that we've had over the last several years. Thank you so much for class. I appreciate it.